In part 3 of exploring the monsters of the multiverse, we continue to explore new and exciting ways to take the current official races and reskin them into monsters and creatures currently unavailable. You want to play a Sauriel, a dinosaur race, or an Aldani, a lobster race? Well, I'm going to tell you how to do it without even touching Homebrew. We're going to take a race's mechanics, take off their lore and flavor text, and put on something brand new, reflavoring them to be different races from previous editions, folklore, and more. Hello Acolytes, welcome to the Cleric Corner. My name is Riker, and here we talk about all things Dungeons & Dragons, tapping into our higher powers to create worlds more unique and stories more impactful. Now I will add again that there is always the option of taking Tasha's Cauldron of Everything with their custom lineages and reflavoring their feats to be the race that you want to be. But now pre-built races already have a few extra perks that might even be better for some other options. So as we explore that, I will mention again that if the race appears in Eberron or Ravnica or settings like it where they are specific to that setting, I will be covering those in a separate video. You can check out the playlist if you want. Coming in first, nipping at your heels, we have the Kobold, which has actually changed a lot since previous editions or reincarnations of the Kobold. In this one, we get dark vision, as well as a draconic cry that gives advantage for your allies, and then a choice of a few other options. You either gain an extra proficiency, advantage over the frightened condition, or a sorcerer cantrip. But speaking of other reincarnations, it would be a crime not to mention you could reflavor these as previous editions, being more goblin-like or dog-like. Or with their cry being similar to like warlord mechanics, you could have them just be any race, but be a commander. Their cry being more of a rally the troops or giving a command. But if you really liked the draconic flavor of them, you could reflavor it to be a drake, like a really young dragon, perhaps young enough they can't quite get the handle of their wings or their breath. You know what might actually be really fun is changing your race partway through the campaign from a kobold to a dragonborn, and maybe even getting a feat to give you flying speed, showing your growth as you change from a young dragon to a more adult one. Level up your own dragon character, and knowing that you probably won't get to large size unless you have a very generous DM, or I know of a couple subclasses that actually would allow you to get to that size, but definitely a start to a young dragon as they go out adventuring, trying to accumulate the start of their horde. Or if you just wanted to get a flying speed and keep your little kobold, you could be a dragon rot kobold from previous editions, which were basically just kobolds with wings. But now getting rid of the dragon aesthetic, but keeping the scales, we now look at the Lizardfolk. You have extra skills, natural armor, as well as breathing underwater for 15 minutes at a time, and then also a bite attack that gives you temporary hit points when you damage them. So firstly, as far as flavor goes, it'd be remiss not to talk about different kinds of lizards that you can be, including chameleons or flying geckos, horned lizards, blue-tongued skinks, iguanas, Komodo dragons, leaf-tailed gecko, and a frilled lizard. But also knowing that the lizard folk socially is more outliers and crafters of society, so they would make great gnolls as well. Or you can try the monster troglodyte, which is basically just a lizard folk that lives in the Underdark. And then taking inspiration from previous editions, we have the muck dweller, which is basically their amphibious counterpart, or the Nezumi, which is a savage rat race. But why not take inspiration from when reptiles ruled the earth with the dinosaurs and be the Sauriel? From Triceratops, Brachiosauruses, Raptors, and Spinosauruses, they are back with a vengeance to investigate a weird meteor that fell and killed half their tribe. And then one more thing for the lizard folk, just tapping into this one feature where they bite and gain temporary hit points, then this flavor is basically consuming the enemy. It would make good for a vampiric stat block as well, consuming the essence of those that you bite in some way. Up next, we have the Orc, which arguably has the most iterations across not only different editions, but just in D&D 5e alone. But of course, we'll look at the most recent one, them having dark vision, the ability to carry twice as much weight, and then when they get knocked down to 0 hit points, they instead get to pop back up to 1, and then when they dash, they get to give themselves temporary hit points. And you can take similar ideas to what I had mentioned when I went over the half-orc in the player's handbook video, including ogres, half-giantses, and cyclopses. But having similar features to the undead fortitude that a lot of undead have, it would be a good option to flavor undead characters. including if you wanted to be a ghast, or a ghoul, or a Giralon zombie, or just really an undead version of any race. And with zombies and undead, you also have options when it comes to devils. Both a Tanarok and a bearded devil would make a great and fun addition to your game depending on the setting. But to me, being half orc or full orc, or really just half of anything, really doesn't matter. It's just aesthetic to whatever your character is. In fact, you could be a half orc with an orc stat block or an orc with a half orc stat block. Just be creative. Next up, we have the Sea Elf, and now we are extremely lucky to have a lot of water-based races in D&D, including the Triton, Water Genasi, Lakatha, and the Simic Hybrid. So it would actually be really easy to interchange all of these races to be one another, giving you a stat block that really explains you instead of your race. Being able to replace one aesthetically if you want, giving you a variety of options just to explain your water-based race. So because of this, I'll actually talk about both the Triton and the Sea Elf, but starting with the Sea Elf, you get advantage against being charmed, the ability to sleep 4 hours instead of 8 for the night, and proficiency in perception. You also get resistance to cold damage, the ability to swim and breathe in water, and the ability to talk with sea-based animals. The Triton also gets the ability to have resistance to cold, the ability to swim and breathe underwater, as well as dark vision. You can also speak to water-based animals as well, so perhaps the only difference is that as a Triton, you get the spells Gust of Wind, Fog Cloud, and Water Walk. So very much your Aquaman-like characters. Or you can reflavor them to be more like Aquaman's enemies, like a Sahuagin, which have a special relationship with sharks, or a Scion that are known to be slaves to krakens. There are merfolk that probably need no introduction, as well as Marrows, who are merfolk that are magically transformed. If you do go merfolk, I would suggest to talk with your DM and see how your fishtail turning into legs would work, or perhaps you're in an underwater campaign and it really doesn't matter. Or it's always a tail and you're going around with a wheelchair, or at least one of your parties pushing you around. Or again, just taking inspiration from The Little Mermaid. Or you could be keeping that part of yourself secret and you have to be extra careful not to get H2O on your legs, or you'll change back into a mermaid at an unopportune time. But then also taking inspiration from previous editions, we have the Cecilias, which are more of a octopus-like merfolk. But have fun making your bottom half a variety of fish, including an eel, a clownfish, a shark, or a seahorse. Or you can be a Darfellan, which is a water-based race that looks like orca whales. And funny enough, this was my first ever campaign character. Ooh, or you could play a Coalinth, which is basically an underwater hobgoblin. So you have your goblinoid that's water-based. But moving on to another race of elves, but this time from the Shadowfell, we look at the Shadar-Kai. Like most elves, you get proficiency in perception, you have advantage against being charmed, as well as being able to sleep for 4 hours instead of 8 on a long rest. But you also get dark vision, resistance to necrotic damage, and the ability to teleport and temporarily have resistance to all damage. It's described that this ability gives us almost a phasing technique, so it gives us a lot of options if we reflavored it to other Shadowfell creatures. Starting with the Skulk, which is always very translucent, but not completely invisible unless you use a different ability. Measles that are once hermits, but now filled with sorrow. But speaking of sorrow, we have the Sorrowsworn, which are embodiments of harsh emotions like loneliness or loss. We also have the Banderhob, which is a bounty hunter monstrosity, which always has the stamp of approval from Fry Minis. And it was funny, he actually reflavored all of his tongue-like abilities to be paladin abilities in a recent one-shot. Well done. Because unfortunately, we don't yet have a race with a swallowing capability, so as far as reflavoring goes, this is probably the best we're gonna get. Up next, we have our feline friends, the Tobaxi, and you get proficiency in skills of stealth and perception, as well as a claw attack, a climbing speed, dark vision, and the ability to move twice your speed sometimes. This is very much a go-to race for all your speed min-maxers out there, but first, let's talk about cats. Now, big strength-based cats might fit better with the Leonin stat block, we'll talk about it in another video, but let's talk about other species that might fit the bill. Cheetahs, bobcats, caracals, and the pampas, jaguarundis, bay cats, hairless cats, and munchkin cats with their little legs. But you also don't have to limit this to only cats. There's a lot of animals that are good at climbing and running, including monkeys, or bears, or lizards. Or perhaps you're just a human with contraptions of artifice, grappling hooks like Attack on Titan. You can also look at other settings like the Zephs, who have bursts of speeds due to their psionics, or a Tibbet, who is a cat-like human with the ability to turn into a cat. But why not have your catfolk be mostly human anyways, and just have cat ears and a cat tail? I know all you furries are out there. I know what you like. And some other creatures that might be fun to bring to your table would be the Giralon, this time not a zombie, or the Quickling, which is a super fast Fey-like creature. But continuing with the races, let's look at what the Tortle can bring us. You get proficiency in a couple skills, the ability to breathe underwater for an hour, as well as a claw attack, and the ability to increase your armor class if you withdraw into your shell. This shell giving you a base armor class of 17, however, you should know you won't be able to wear armor if you are a turtle. But as usual, you can look at some unique types of turtles that you can reflavor visually, and this including the snapping turtle, or the leatherback, or a soft-shelled turtle, a Galapagos, or a pig nose. But there are also other animals that have equal amount of shell kind of built into them, including an armadillo, a hermit crab, a lobster, a nautilus, a snail, a pangolin, a type of oyster, or the prehistoric Glyptodon. I would actually be really interested to know what a humanoid oyster would look like, perhaps like an oozekin with a mollusk shell kind of being hung onto it. Some of these races have been well represented in D&D though, with the Brachyura being from the crab folk, or the Eldani, which is the lobster folk. Another desert-based crustacean creature would be the Crucian from older editions. Take some folklore inspiration and be a Kappa, which is a trickster being that loses all of its power if the head bowl ever spills out all of the water. And to me, this sounds very familiar to the Koopa Troopa, but I'm sure there's no relation. But you could also reflavor the extra shell armor to be more of a magical protection with an Abjurer Wizard, or something with an Earth Genasi hardening their shell of rocks. Or it's just an extremely defensive fighting style that requires you to stick to the same spot. And here we move on to yet another animal race. We have a lot of those today, the Yuen-Ti, which is a snake-like race which is a result of a magical experimentation. You have dark vision, advantage against poison, and the ability to have advantage on all saving throws against spells. You also get the spells Poison Spray, Animal Friendship, and Suggestion. Exploring some unique snakes to reflavor this one as would include the python, a cobra, a leaf-nosed, rattlesnake, horned viper, thread snake, or Asian vine. There are even a few underwater snakes that you can take inspiration from. But the cool thing about Yuen-Ti is that some of them are full snake, some others are full human, and others are somewhere in between. You could be a humanoid just with snake scale patterns across their skin, or literally be a human with snake-like arms. You could be a snake from the waist down, or be a snake from just the waist up. And technically, because it is a magical transformation, this doesn't have to be limited to humans. You could bring your Tortle or Tobaxi and give them snake-like appendages. In fact, actually, a little sidebar here, if you just wanted to do that for like all the races, saying the Tortle race and just giving a human a turtle-like shell, you could do that. Or perhaps your tiefling got spliced with a bunny and it now has bunny legs and you use the Herongon stat block. But back to the Yuen-Ti, be creative on how these snakes attach. Perhaps all your fingers are just wriggling snakes, or your hair like a Medusa. Or embrace the full snake aesthetic and take inspiration from other mystical creatures, including sea monsters, basilisks, and the Mayan god Quetzalcoatl. Maybe the snake god Dendar in your world looks like one of these creatures. So not only are there so many ways to reflavor all of these races, but also ways to mix and match them if you want. So if you have other ideas or other reflavoring options that you've used or think of, please add them to the comments below. I'd love to hear about them. And just like last week, I want to reward those who stay to the end of the video and tell you about some things I have going on in the future. I'm going to have big changes for Patreons and special benefits to people who support me on that level. And I need writers and storytellers to help me in those projects. So if you have experience with D&D content, please contact me in my email linked below in the description. I want my channel to be a source of inspiration for everyone and give people permission to be as creative as they want to be. So if that's what resonates with you, that's who I want on my team. But for everyone out there, this series of the Multiverse of Madness is a 3-parter, so if you want to check out the rest and other reflavoring videos I did, you can check out this playlist here. But in the meantime, go out there and spread the good word of D&D and make the world a better place, both on and off the table. See you in the next one.